All right, so what I want you to do is, what's important here to see the proper effects of this is you need to have nice strong colors. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a French ultramarine and then a cadmium red, or you can even use, if you've got a nice viridian or something, a green like that, you can also use that as well. So, but I'm definitely going to use a French ultramarine because I can make a nice strong sort of color with that. So I'm going to mix that in. I'm going to make a nice puddle over here. And you're going to see that with the paint, the amount of paint that you put on and the amount of salt is all going to have different effects. So after this, what I would suggest you guys do is actually experiment and see exactly what happens when you do different things with your watercolor and your different salts. And I'm going to put some red on the side as well because I think it might be quite nice to see the other effect I'm going to show you as well. We have a little bit of a mix. But any sort of too dark colors. So don't go with yellow or anything like that. Rather go with a nice strong color. Okay. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to have my salts ready to go as well. So what I did make a note of doing was with my salts, I made sure that I put the names on the lids and on the sides because everything looks quite similar. Okay, so there I've got my fine salt, my medium salt, and I've got my coarse salt. All right, so I'm going to use all three to see what happens. So what I'm going to do here is this part over here, I've written a little bit of water. So I'm not going to put a lot of water on here. Here I'm going to put a lot more water. Remember my board is on a bit of an angle, at a bit of an angle. So just be careful that you don't, it doesn't sort of run downwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put mine flat. I'm going to use like a medium size brush, not a very big one. So I've got different size brushes here, but I'm just going to use sort of a medium size brush for this one over here. And I'm going to use clean water. And obviously I'm going to first mix my paint and get some paint going here. Okay, so remember I want it quite sort of quite dark. All right, so don't put too much water in here. Okay, so you have a choice here. You can actually wet this first. So I'm using a 200 GSM paper. So my paper is going to warp to a certain point because the pad that I've got is a multimedia pad. It's not watercolor. So if you are using watercolor paper, then it's obviously going to have a different effect because you've got more of those little, especially if it's a textured one, it's not smooth. It is going to give you a different effect. So I have got a bit of watercolor paper here as well, but right at the end, then I'll experiment with that as well. Okay. So here I've got my salt and my salts are all ready to go. And I'm going to use a little bit of water. All right, so what I mean by a little bit of water, I don't mean as in a little bit of water in here. I just mean that when you're painting, you're not going to have it too thick. Okay. I don't want too much water on my paintbrush, and I'm just going to put a little bit of paint down like that, and a little bit of paint there. And you can fill up this whole block if you want to. Okay, and now I'm going to put some fine salt at the top here. I'm going to put fine salt all the way down there. This is just with a little bit of water. Then I'm going to pick up some of my medium salt and I'm going to put it down the middle. And then I'm going to put some of the thicker salt over the rock salt. Okay. All right, so that's just with a little bit of water. What I'm going to do in this bottom piece here is I'm going to make the paint a lot darker. So there you can see the paint has been watered down a little bit, but it's not very, very dark. Okay, for this bottom one here, I'm going to use the paint a lot thicker. So here I'm not going to add quite as much water. But remember, you're going to have to work quite quickly because it is going to dry quite quickly. You can really put the salt on as you see fit, okay? So don't stress too much. As I said, this is very much about a happy accident. Here I want to make the colors a lot darker. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to put fine salt on the one side. You see, the fine salt you can control a little bit more, you know, about what happens. And then that's the medium one, and then I'm going to do the coarse one. And you obviously have to work quite quickly, because if it is warm, it's obviously going to, your paint is going to dry. And you can see, because I haven't got a little, I've only got a little bit of water in here, you can see it'll only have a certain effect to it. When I put a lot of water on, it takes a lot longer to dry, and it gives a completely different effect. Okay. Now I'm going to do a lot of water here. All right, so there, I'm actually going to wet this beforehand, and then I'm going to put the color on, and then I'm going to put the salts on. Okay. All right, so here we go. So here I'm putting a lot of so now I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to put fine salt down here. Oh, sherbet, sorry, that was my medium salt, my apologies. Picked up the wrong one. Here's the fine salt. And then this one is the coarse salt. Okay, and you're going to see this is going to give you a completely different effect. Now what I want you to do is I want you to have a little blob of yellow. I'm not sure what colors you put in there, but I'm just going to use yellow for mine. I'm going to have a little blob of yellow on the side as well. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do there. There we go. Right, so now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to put also lots of water here. And I'm going to put the reds and the whatever down. All right, so there I've put the fine, and then there I've put the coarse one. All right, but I'm going to wait for it a little bit. I want to wait for it to start actually doing something. Okay. Obviously, this is going to take a lot longer because it's got quite a sort of a pool there. So I'm going to grab the hairdryer, but I don't want to have it too close. The only thing is when you do use the hairdryer, you're going to notice that when you take the salt off, it almost binds the salt to the paper to a point. So it is a little bit harder to take it off, but for the sake of just getting it done a little bit quicker, I am going to use the hairdryer a little bit. So if you guys want to grab your hair dryers and just blow it, don't blow it too close though, just try and get it a little bit to react a little bit faster. Obviously the more salt is on your paper, so this is what this shows you with regards to, sorry, the more salt. What happens here is with regards to the amount of water on your paper, obviously the more water that's in your mixture, the more it absorbs. Okay, the more the salt absorbs. Okay, so you can see here, because there wasn't a lot of water in the salt mixture, it actually didn't really absorb all that much. All right, of the color at least at any rate. When it's got a little bit more water, then it actually absorbs more of the pigment. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with my Epsom salt, you'll see it's got a totally different feel. If you can't pick it up with your fingers, you can just use a teaspoon or something, okay, or some tweezers. You'll notice it's extremely soft. It hasn't got that granular sort of effect that your normal salt has got. Okay, so there I'm going to put it quite far apart, and here I'm going to make a little pile. I want to see what happens when I make a pile like that. What's nice about the fine salt when you are using the fine salt is you'll see how you can control it to a point, which is quite nice. You know, you can sort of really put it where you want to put it, or which is actually nice in a way. Whereas the coarser one, you can use also to control, but then you're going to see it almost gives you a sort of a flower effect. The big ones, okay. So you're not going to get that flower effect with a fine salt. Only with the coarse salt will you get that sort of flower effect. But with the alum, I'm just basically going to just stick with the normal alum. I'm not going to worry too much about the big rocks because those rocks are quite large. I'm going to put one rock down just to see what happens. But the rest I'm going to just do this. So again, I'm going to wet this, but not so much. I'm actually not going to use my mop brush. My mop brush actually makes it way too wet. I'm just going to use a big flat brush for this. So just remember your mop brush does put a lot of water on your paper, so just be very careful there. Okay, so here I'm going to, this is the alum. Actually, I've got one little rock here, but I think it's actually a little bit dry for that. But we'll put the rock down anyway and just see what happens. So the alum feels very much just like normal salt. One rock there. So, let's see. Okay, then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do the Glauber salt quickly. This Glauber salt is very, very fine. It's much finer than even your what you call it, ink as well. Your standard ink. Not ink. Your standard salt. It's very, very fine. Okay, and then here. So this last block, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the paint on quite thick without water on the paper. And I'm going to use a spray bottle and I'm going to spray on there so that you can just spray on there and see what happens. So maybe what you should rather do is just grab a piece of paper or a board or something just so that it doesn't go onto the rest of your picture as well. Okay, so just maybe grab, I've got a biggish board here, or you can just use a piece of paper just to cover it because I don't want the spray to go onto that. So I'm just going to lean that up there like that. I'm not worried about that one too much because I am using Glauber spray anyway. So, okay, so here I'm going to put the paint on. Can you see there? I'm putting it on so that's actually quite thick. All right, so it doesn't really look like watercolor as in the traditional sort of watercolor, almost like a dry brush type of effect. You can see what I'm doing there. And then I'm going to spray on top of that to see what effect we get. Okay. Okay, and then I'm going to grab my spray. And just a few little sprays. So get your spray bottle going, and then I'm just going to spray. Oh yes. I don't know if you can see what's happening there. Okay, so that I'm going to leave to dry. All right, so you can put this one to the side. Right. Okay, so this is where it gets quite interesting when you start using the inks. Right, so I'm going to put my palette away. So I've actually got two separate palettes. I decided to have two separate ones. It just makes my life a little bit easier. Okay, so whatever ink you happen to have, then you can put that on to your palettes along. This is where the eyedropper comes in quite handy. You know, if you've got one of those pipette things. So often you can buy the pipettes. I didn't have a pipette, but I found an eyedropper from a medicine bottle, which is quite handy. It makes it a lot easier to put your inks onto your palette than to have to dip a brush into your ink. Okay, so this is going to be my normal black Indian ink. I'm going to put that down here for the moment. Okay, just remember to clean your pipette obviously very well in between, okay, because you don't want to mix the inks. It's always good to have at least 2 jars of water. So I must just remember that's my black Indian ink. Then I'm going to get my Quink ink. So I'm going to I've got a blue and a black. I went and bought myself a blue one as well. Okay, so this is the Quink ink. The non-waterproof Indian ink as well, because it will definitely have a different effect. Okay, so there's the blue one. Okay, I'm just going to put those inks down quickly. Then over here, in my little things over here, I'm going to just put down the other Indian ink and the acrylic ink, so you can see the difference. Okay. To put some of the colors down. So when you start working with these inks, so if you do buy these inks, when you do work with them, just make sure that you do clean your pipette in between nicely. Okay, so make sure you've got a nice clean thing here. Okay, so here I'm going to be using the Parker Quink and with the Glauber spray and the Glauber Salt. Okay, so here's the Glauber Salt. I'm going to have that ready to go. And I've got the Glauber spray. Alright, so this is going to show you what happens here when we do this. Okay, so I'm going to wet my paper a bit first beforehand. And I'm not going to wet the whole thing, I'm just going to make a sort of a bit of a pattern here. And I'm going to pick up some of the black Quink ink. Okay, like so. And then I'm going to pick up some of the blue Quink ink. And you can actually mix these, by the way. So you can actually experiment later on. I'll show you just now when we start experimenting a little bit. You can add a bit of Indian ink to this, or you can add some color, your acrylic inks, etc. as well. Okay, so I'm going to now use the Glauber Salt. I'm going to put that in the middle. And then this is the spray. So you can see what the spray is doing here. What it does is it starts making little legs. I don't know if you can see how it's running into the side here.
Yes.
And we're going to wait for it to react, and you're going to see how it changes as time goes by. Okay, so that's your Parker. I'm going to put Parker ink here down with the Epsom the fine rock and table salt and the alum as well. Okay, so I'm going to quickly put those down as well. And as I said, you can actually mix and match. You can. What I did when I did the course as well is we did a lot of mixing and matching. So we would put in some alum and then we would put in some normal table salt as well, just to see what happened. Okay, so here I'm going to wet here. I'm going to put some of the black down, some of the blue down, and I'm going to use the Epsom salt here. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same with the fine and the rock. And if you can see where it's starting to turn brown over here, where I added some of the Glauber salt. I'm actually going to add a bit more. I want to get a bit more of effect there. So you can see, you can play around. So if it's not doing something and you want to do something more interesting, you can pick up some more while it's still drying. But you can see how it's making these little legs over here. Go. Right, so that's the fine. Okay, so now I'm going to wet this again, and I'm going to use just the fine salt and the rock salt. Remember to always have some paper on hand, hey? Okay, guys, this makes life a lot easier. Fine salt. Okay, and you'll see the inks do tend to dry a little bit quicker as well, eh? Right, and then I'm going to use the alum over here. Okay, so there is a little bit of salt left over there, but it's fine. I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to use the alum. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to go on to the Indian ink while that's busy drying. So just make sure, as you've been adding your stuff, that your salt isn't going all over your paper. So I've got like all different salts now sitting on my top of my paper over here. So I'm going to just brush it off quickly before I continue. Otherwise, it is going to have a slightly different effect, obviously. Okay. All right, so this is going to be the Indian ink now. Okay. So if you've got both the normal Indian ink, and then you've also got the non-waterproof one, then you can put that in a separate little section on your paper. Just remember to mark down exactly what you've been doing, because otherwise you won't know what you did. All right, so just make sure you have got little notes next to your things there. Okay, so this is going to be my Indian ink with the Glauber. So this is, and you can see the Indian ink's got sort of like a brownish touch to it. I'm going to fill this one up here to see what effect it has. Okay, so this is the Glauber salt with the Indian ink and the Glauber spray. Okay, so you can see how the spray is totally different to the salt. Okay. Right, this is the Epsom salt with the Indian ink. So this is the waterproof one, obviously. Okay. So this is this one I've made it a little bit thicker because I actually want to see, sort of get a better effect on that one. Still sticking with the Indian ink. Okay, and then I'm going to be doing the alum with this one over here. So I'm just going to brush this off again. I can see that I have got a bit of stuff on here. Make sure I don't have any of that on there. So remember, a lot to do with the water. So for instance, say this rock one isn't having much of an effect over here. What I can do is I can drop some water on the salt as well. And then we'll see if that has some sort of effect, okay, on the bigger ones. It did work with the fine one. That's definitely already having a different effect there. So just dropping a bit more salt. You see how quickly this Indian ink dries? It dries very, very fast when you once it's on your paper. Yeah. So this is the alum. And there you go. So this Indian ink you can use if you're making the Sumanagashi paper as well, which is also very cool. But that's another whole kettle of fish. That's it's another whole experiment on its own. Okay, and then this is the alum. Okay, I'm not going to use the alum rock there. All right, can you see how beautifully this is coming out? Can you see how the colors are split up into browns? This is the black ink, by the way. It's not even the blue ink. This is actually the black ink. It's actually split the ink into blues and into browns. Right, so now I'm going to go into with these different colors now. Okay, it's lovely just to bring color into your pictures. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to wet the paper a bit. Right, so just quickly wet this one. And I'm going to use the eyedropper this time. Right, and then here I'm going to do the Glauber Salt. You see what this Glauber Salt does with the inks. And the Glauber spray. Can you see how totally different the ink works compared to your watercolors? It makes these little sort of like, little legs. So the ink is actually, and it's very quite intense as well. Okay, so it really does make the most beautiful effects. So, okay. Oh, sorry, I did say I should brush that off there. Right, so I'm going to quickly do that with the Epsom salt quickly. And when you mix them with the watercolors, it also does some interesting things too. Okay, that's my normal salt, Epsom salt. Okay, so this is the Epsom salt. Okay, then I'm going to do the fine salt and the rock salt. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Sorry. These inks always amaze me what they do, especially if you use an eyedropper. It just works very well.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, so that's your normal salt and the rock salt. Can't wait to see what's happened to the watercolors when I go back there. Okay, and then this one is the alum. Sorry, my water is getting a bit dirtier, but that's fine. It'll just have to do. So as I said, it also depends on the properties of the ink. So the ink has got more than one pigment in it. It can also have a different effect to an ink or a watercolor that's got two pigments in it. Okay, so each one will vary. Okay, and then this is the alum. But it works the best with the Parker Quink. Okay, so that really does split the colours up. Right, so that's that one, and then we'll just quickly do the acrylic ink for you guys. So the acrylic ink is completely different as well. It is also water-based, but it's completely different to your Indian inks. So what's nice about this is you can see the different effects that each of these have. So you'll be able to decide now, do you want to go and spend money and go and buy acrylic ink? Or do you want to go and spend money and go and buy the other inks? So if you do start using this pipette, just make sure it's really clean before you actually go and pick up your colours, obviously out of your actual jars, your bottles. And also just make sure that you do actually give them a shake beforehand as well, especially with the acrylic, not so much with the Indian ink. Okay, cool. Acrylic inks. Okay, guys, so hold on and you'll see. I know you're sitting there watching, but at least you are learning as you go along. Aren't these colours, isn't this beautiful? Oh, my word. Sorry, just fall in love with that all over again. Come on. Okay, so this is the Glauber. This I'm just going to use the Glauber Salt. I'm not going to use the spray because I've got quite a lot of water on here already. It's not really going to make a difference. So I'm just going to use the Glauber Salt for that one. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to this one. And I'm going to use the Epsom. In actual fact, I'm just going to pick this up with my paintbrush. I think it's actually just a bit easier than trying to do the pipette thing. Come to think of it, I'm actually just going to do that, yeah. The pipette of mine is a mission to clean. So in actual fact, it's actually probably better just to have a pipette that's got, like different pipettes for different colors, so a blue one and a red one, etc., than to try and clean one in between, because it actually just is a bit of a mission. Okay, so Epsom salts, which is here, right, Epsom salt. And of course, we're going to have to wait for all of this to dry completely before we can actually see what happens, okay. There is. I nearly made a board with all of this on to show you, but I thought it's actually better for you to actually watch what I'm doing. So it is a bit more time consuming, but at least. But you'll see the final one we're going to be doing is with watercolor. So you don't have to have any of the inks or anything like that as well. And it makes the most amazing painting. Sort of semi-abstract, but it's quite exquisite. So. Okay, so I'm going to do yellow. Maybe I should do blue now. I keep on following the same sort of color scheme here. Be a little bit different. Okay, so this is the fine and the rock salt. Make sure I'm picking up the right. Now you can see why I labeled my stuff, because if I had to just randomly think, oh, which one does this, I'd be in serious trouble, because there's no ways I'd remember it. That's why I put it on the side as well, not just on the thing. You can see I put the G salt on the side and not just the on the lid itself. Okay. Right, and last one is the alum. But you guys will definitely be able to get alum somewhere if you, definitely the chemist. You can ask them as well when you go there next time. Look how beautifully these acrylic inks work when you drop them into one another, how they actually create these almost like fans type of thing as well. So also totally different to your those inks. So you can see that they all work in sort of different ways. You can see that these stay quite sort of intense. Okay, obviously that's more of a warm, it's more of a pink than a red, that one. Okay. Alum. Right, alum is the last one. And there's the alum. Okay. Right, there we go. Okay, cool. So I've done that board. I'm going to leave that to dry. I'm not going to go and use the hairdryer. Okay, so I've got my colors ready now to put down. So this one we're going to be doing a sort of a wash of different colors, and then we're going to be putting some raindrops on here. Okay, very effective, looks amazing afterwards, and it's not just this sort of abstract look. So I'm going to start putting water on. So remember here I'm actually not using the other paper. This is now proper watercolor paper, but you can obviously also use your multimedia paper too. Okay, so I've got my color down here, and I'm going to start putting down my darks and my lights. And remember, you want it to blend in. Okay, so you want the colors to sort of blend nicely. You can have darks and lights here and there. Remember, if you find it's not wet enough, you can always pick up your spray bottle and just spray a bit. You can also just add a bit of water to your paper as well. Just make sure that you lay it flat then. Remember, it always does dry a little bit lighter than you expect, hey? Okay. So in some of these places, I'm literally picking up pure pigment. And I do want to take it all the way to the edge because it makes a nice finish if you take it all the way to the edge. Just keep on looking at your paper, making sure it is relatively wet. You obviously can leave a few white patches in between, that's not an issue. And then you're going to be adding salt to this. You can just use fine salt if you want to. You can actually add the granular as well, but that's entirely up to you. If you want to add the thicker salt as well, you can welcome to do that. Definitely going to make some darker patches here. As long as you see all the colors are sort of bleeding into one another, that's the most important thing. So where you see it isn't, then you can just quickly bring in some more water there before the paint dries completely. And it should bleed. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now while it's wet, I'm going to start putting salt on. Okay. So you can use your different salts here, just the different granules. Start off with the table salt first, put that down, and then where you feel you might want a few of the bigger things. I don't really want so much of the flowery effect though, so that's why I'm going to really stick more with the finer table salt. Putting it more in places. I'm going to rather veer away from the rock salt, okay? So that's just the way I want to do this. So I'm just sticking with table salt, because I can control it a bit better. So I can put a big puddle of table salt where I want it. Okay, now this is obviously going to have to dry before we carry on with it. Okay, so that's why I wanted to do this now quickly. Then I'll show you some of the experimental stuff we're going to do. And remember, you're not going to know exactly what's happened here or happening here until you actually see the final result. So I think I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave it just as it is, and then I'm going to put it down in front of my fan in the other room there to let that dry. Okay, and then while that's drying, Then I'm going to show you some experimental stuff with the bleach and the nail polish remover and the alcohol. All right, on a separate sheet of paper. Okay, cool. So I'm going to take that and go and let it dry. Remember to let it dry flat, guys, okay? So don't let it stand up at an angle, all right? Right, okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do almost like little planets, if you want to put it that way. Okay, so here we're going to just get your watercolor. So now you can have different watercolors. So you can put some different colors down if you want to. So grab some of the colors that you like and put them on your palette here. All right, so have fun with your pinks and whatever colors you like there. You can welcome to use any color you like. I'm also going to keep my inks that I've got on hand as well, just to show you what you can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some of the surgical spirits. I'm going to put a little bit just in the lid over here. Okay, that's for the alcohol. If you guys have got some cotton buds, earbuds, Q-tips, I don't know what everybody else calls them. If you can maybe just get 1 or 2 or 3, just one for each liquid that you happen to have. Okay, so I couldn't get normal bleach. Everything nowadays is thick bleach. And I don't have a swimming pool, so I couldn't get any chlorine. And of course nowadays they don't normally just sell chlorine on its own anymore. They actually do, it's all mixed with other stuff as well, so you can't just get normal chlorine. So the bleach I'll have to actually, I did water it down a little bit, but it is still a little bit too thick for my liking. I actually don't even know if you can buy normal, just plain bleach. I don't think I've seen it on the shelves for years. It's just your standard bleach, you know. Okay, so what you're going to do here is you're just going to make a whole lot of little, sometimes they actually end up looking like planets afterwards, okay. And I'm going to use all the different materials that I've got. So even if you, I know it sounds very weird, but even if you've got black coffee, you can even experiment with black coffee or black tea for that matter, or red wine, okay. So you can play around with these with your watercolors. You don't have to just use watercolors. You can experiment with adding different things to it. All right. So these are all sort of things you can experiment with to see what effects you get. And then what you do is you catalog them all, okay. And if you ever want to create something, then you can always look at the catalog and say, oh, cool, that actually works very well as, say, something for a jellyfish or something for it. Okay, so I'm just going to make a circle on my paper. And then I'm going to add some paint. Doesn't matter what you add, it's just up to you. You can make little dots if you want to, or if you want to make it a full sort of color, then you can do that too. So this one I'm actually going to make it, I'm going to fill up the whole circle with color, 2 different colors, okay. Stick with my blues and my purples. Okay. And remember you're going to write down underneath is what you've done. And then I'm going to take my Q-tip and I'm going to add the alcohol. I'm going to make a dot of alcohol and I'm going to see what it does. You see how it immediately makes a white spot. Okay, so that's with the alcohol. Obviously, it also depends on how much water is on your paper as well. I'm going to keep that Q-tip by the alcohol, and I'm going to do another similar one, and I'm going to use the bleach, and then I'm going to use the remover as well. Okay, and remember it is going to change as we go along. Okay, so it's not going to stay exactly like that. It is going to change. I'm going to do another solid color here. Okay, and then here I'm going to use the bleach. So my bleach is quite thick, so it's going to be very interesting to see how it affects it. I'm going to actually try and draw with the bleach. Can you see how it pushes the color away? Okay, and then this one I'm going to do the Q-tips. Okay, and then now I'm going to use the Q-Tex. Now the Q-Tex, you'll notice the acetone gives a much softer finish, if you want to put it that way. If you look at the, this is the alcohol, and then this is the bleach, the thick bleach. Okay, I don't know what chlorine will do, I must be honest. I've never really tried the chlorine. But you'll notice that the Q-Tex, the edges don't normally finish off quite so sharp. It also depends on what Q-Tex you're using. Like this Q-Tex of mine is a moisturizing one. So sometimes the moisturizing ones have got a bit of oil in them. If you can rather get pure acetone, it is actually better just to use pure acetone. Can you see it doesn't make it quite, it doesn't whiten it quite so much as the alcohol and the bleach. The bleach actually looks very cool. I'm actually quite impressed with that one. And obviously with each one that you do, it's actually going to be different with each subsequent thing. Okay, so I'm going to write over here. This is just watercolor and alcohol. I've forgotten how to spell alcohol. Okay, and then this is watercolor. Oh my word. Bleach, and this is watercolor and acetone. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some salt and alcohol and the watercolor. Okay, so this is where you start playing around and you start adding different things to see what on earth is going to happen. Okay, so again I'm going to make a little planet here. And I'm going to add some red, and this time I'm going to make it quite thick because I want that salt to sort of show up quite nicely. And I'm just going to add a little bit of sort of yellow little dots there. So you don't have to make it a solid color, you can make it more interesting. And I'm going to put some of my salt here. And then I'm going to use the eyedropper this time. And remember, you're obviously going to have to wait and see what happens, you know, with the salt. You're going to actually have to wait and see what effect it is. And then I'm going to now add, let's see, I'm going to add some alcohol to the salt with my eyedropper. I'm not going to use the Q-tip. Okay, so that I've added some alcohol now. We're going to see what that does. Okay. Right, just make sure that's nice and clean again. Okay, then I'm going to move on to the next one. So that is watercolor plus alcohol plus salt. Okay, now we move on to the next one. And you can use a little bit of water, you can use a lot of water, you can do whatever you want with your watercolors there. This one I'm just going to make one big circle. And here I'm going to actually take some of my ink, just for interest's sake, to see what happens. I'm going to take some yellow. No, let me take some of this pink ink and I'm going to drop it in the middle. Okay, so unfortunately, because I'm on a downhill, it didn't, I was hoping it would actually fan out, but because I've got it on a, not a flat board. So this is now your Indian ink on top of watercolor. Okay, so that's the effect that has on that one. Okay, so I've done the watercolor, the alcohol and the salt. I want to do watercolor, bleach and salt. Okay, so this I'm going to make it, I'm going to actually make it flat rather. Okay, so watercolor. So this is the salt, the watercolor, and I'm going to use the bleach. Okay, so the bleach, I'm going to use the Q-tip because the bleach is quite thick. So I'm going to literally drop it on here and see what, oh my word, that's interesting. Okay, sure. It sort of pushes look how it pushes the pigment away. It's quite bizarre, actually. Okay, very interesting. We'll see what that looks like at the end. Okay, and then this one I'm going to do watercolor and the Q-tex with the salt as well. So remember, all of these things have got different chemical reactions, you know. So they're all going to react slightly differently. Also, this pink color that I've got here is actually the high quality watercolor. You can actually see how well the pigment actually works. Okay, so I'm going to put some Q-tex in the middle, making sure that my pipette is actually quite dry. I'm going to put the Q-tex down first, and then I'm going to put the salt on top of that, and then see what happens. So, okay. I'm going to put Q-tex there, and there, and there, and there. See how interesting that looks? That's the Q-tex. And then I'm going to use one big piece of my rock salt. Let's see what happens with that in the middle. Okay. Okay, so I want you guys just to explore. You don't obviously have to copy exactly what I'm busy doing. I'm just playing around here and seeing what I get. You can see how the waterproof ink actually does fill up the surface. You can actually sketch into it. So you see how the waterproof ink doesn't act the same way as a watercolor. If I put a watercolor in here, what would happen is it would just go into the water, and this is very wet still, whereas the waterproof ink actually sketches. Almost giving a silhouette type of effect. Obviously you could also do that obviously once your paint is dry as well. Okay, but this is quite interesting to see what that does. Let's make a nice orange here. Okay, and then I'm going to drop a bit of blue. So this is the acrylic ink. I'm going to try and see what happens here. Oh, I want to put this flat. I want it to run down like I did last time. Oh, look at that. Oh, that is so cool. So this is the acrylic ink that I'm dropping in to my watercolor. Quite like that. Okay, so this is acrylic ink. I actually want to try one with a lighter color, and then see what happens with that, and then put in, just to see for interest's sake. So maybe just do a yellow. I want to see, I'm sure it'll be more effective. Going to do, this is the red acrylic. It's interesting how the acrylic ink disperses the watercolor. And then I want to put some salt maybe on that and see what happens with that. That could be Mars almost. No, actually, I don't know. Maybe that one's more Mars-ish. Okay. Now I'm going to use my non-waterproof ink. So this is the non-waterproof ink. I want to see what happens here. And then I'm going to drop in some acrylic ink to that. Oh, good heavens. Okay, it's very interesting. Whenever I do this, I always get such a surprise at what happens. So, look how cool that is. That is so cool. You've got to love mixed media, I must be honest. This is so much fun. I wonder if I did the other way around, what would happen if I did... Oh yeah, let's do an acrylic ink wash. So let's do the red. And then... Oh, but it dries. You see, that's the only thing with your ink. Look at that. Can you see what happened there? When you paint with ink, it's not like watercolor at all. It's very immediate. It dries immediately. You can't soften it. It doesn't run. It only runs when you do it like that. Okay. So that is the one disadvantage of it. So you've got to be very careful when you're working with your inks. So this is the non-waterproof ink that I'm putting in there now. And then I'm going to add a drop of water to that to see what happens. I want to see where it goes. Anyway, but then you must explore, you know, use your, like do something like that and then take some bleach and put some bleach on there, you know, and see what happens. Okay, so I want you to experiment over here. So I will continue experimenting and then I'll post that when I'm done with all the experiments there. Right, okay, so those are, okay, so there's one or two sort of wet patches over here, so I'm not going to touch those. I'm leaving the salt for the moment. I'll show you why, all right, because I'm going to show you what happens. Okay, right, so I'm going to be using my normal black Indian ink. You can also try your Parker if you want to. If you haven't got the Indian ink, you can use the Parker ink, but try and use, if you've got the Indian ink, I'd rather use that. But like I said, you are welcome to use the black Parker ink too. But what I want you to do is one thing you must make a note of. When you use ink with salt, don't go and dip your pen. So don't go and take your pen, dip it into the ink, put it on the salt and dip it back into your mixture, okay? Because that salt is going to mess up your ink. All right, it is going to have a reaction, it's going to mess up your ink. So you don't want that, all right? So what I did last time, I did this is I put some in a separate little bottle and I put this Indian ink salt, you know, when I was working with the salt, all right? So you will see what wonderful little crystalline sort of patterns this is made. And if you actually look at it from the side, you can actually even see on the paper that hasn't got the ink, it's also made some crystalline sort of effects there. And this is the Glauber salt, okay? The other salts aren't quite as effective because they're not quite so fine. Okay, so you can see the Glauber salt works very well because it is so fine. Okay, right, so I'm going to grab some ink. Okay, and I always just test it to make sure it's working. Okay, just be careful you don't go and lean on something that's already wet. And very gently, it doesn't matter, you can pick where you want to do it. You start putting in some ink in amongst the salt. And what happens is when you rub the salt off, the ink will stay there, but it will still leave some of that crystalline effect. You just basically touch it on the top of the salt. That's why the pen works quite well. You've almost got a bit more control. And sometimes I'm just going to try it on this one. So this is the non-waterproof Indian ink. So you don't want to press too hard. You literally just want it to sort of bleed in amongst the salt crystals. Okay. So I'm not scraping the salt crystals off. Can you see how it's sort of starting to go in between? And I mean, you just do this where you want to do this. Otherwise, you just take the salt crystals off. I'll show you an example of one that I did before. As I said, it's always a happy accident. You never know quite what you're going to get when you do these things. And then when you've decided you've got enough of the ink, then you can scratch off the salt. You can also water the ink down a bit if you want to, if you don't want it so dark. You see, once you start getting the hang of it, you'll start getting a feel for it. You can see how it actually works, how it runs. Can you see there? When I'm dragging it in a line, I can actually get almost like a fan effect, but it is catching the salt at the same time. So you just got to get a feel for it, what it does. But as I said, it is very much about sort of the happy accident thing. And also depending on how the salt went on the paper, or how it reacted with the rest of it. You can see there, that's some interesting little effects there. And if you want to, obviously you can go and put some coloured inks on there as well, you know, if you want to play around and add some coloured inks. So that's with the Glauber Salt and the Parker Quink. Oh my word, okay, see, so that was, I put too much ink on, so now there's a big black dot there. Well, that's fine, it'll have to do. I shall make it into a squirty little, I don't know. You know, make your mistakes into something. Here we go. I'll have to make another big one here now somewhere too. No, B, come on now. Don't try and get my attention. I think he's looking for a biscuit. Okay, so what I've done is I've made my little accident work for me. And yeah, I've just created some interesting little things over here, which are quite cool. Something definitely very different there. Almost looks like little space creatures or something there. So this is the very first one I did. So this is just the Parker and then a teal ink. Can you see there? Can you see what happens when you take the salt off? It creates almost like this sort of like a ferny type effect. Okay. Or like a coral or something like that. Okay. So that was the Parker ink, the black one, no blue one, and then the teal ink, So there was a teal, I think it was an acrylic ink, and then Indian ink as well. That was with to draw those things in there. And this was sprinkling and spraying the Glauber salt on. Okay, so that was the one. So this one is done with the wax paper. So I'll show you that next with the wax paper to how to do this. All right, so this we're going to, all right, so this is actually with the Quink ink. So all of this I'm going to take the salt off when it's properly dry. I'm trying not to use the hair dryer because it really makes it really difficult to take the salt off. It just does. Okay, so I'll quickly show you the wax paper. Whatever ink you happen to have, or whatever watercolor you happen to have, is fine. I'm going to use the Quink ink, just because I've got the Quink ink as well. All right, and I'm going to spray my paper with the spray. All right, so you can either wet your paper, but if you've got the spray bottle, rather spray it, because otherwise it's almost too much. What I want you to do is this wax paper. It must be not the shiny side. Okay, so the dull side. That's the side that you want to work on. Okay, going to scrunch it up a bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. Just so you've got some sort of patterns on there. Okay. Well, so what we're going to do is you're going to wet the paper and you're going to put some ink on here, and then you're going to take this and you're going to basically lay it on there. Or otherwise, actually what's actually easier is actually to put your wax paper down and then lay your wet paper on top. Okay. All right, and then you're going to press it down quite hard. Okay, so what you're going to do first is you're going to wet this. So either spray it or wet it with just normal water if you want to. And then I'm going to be using my Glauber salt as well. All right, so I want those colors to sort of come out with the Parker ink. Okay. So I'm going to get the Parker ink. I've still got some of the Quink ink here. And of course, obviously you can play around with using inks as well. Do you know what I'm saying? You don't have to just use this. But this is basically how I did the other one. Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to spray. This is my Glauber salt spray. So I'm going to put that on there first. Because I want those colors to dissipate. You're going to put some of your ink on here. Okay. You're going to see it's going to look weird. Make sure it is the other side, not the... And if you want to, you can sprinkle some salt on here as well before you put it down. Okay, so if you feel you want to do that, you can do that. Maybe I'll actually do that anyway. So I'm going to get some of my Glauber salt, which is somewhere. Thank goodness I did this. I'm going to sprinkle some Glauber salt on here as well, just for the hell of it. And then I'm going to take this and then I'm going to lay it on top of that. Okay, carefully. And now you're going to basically just roll it. So what you can do is, if you've got a roller, I actually do have one, I just don't have it on me right now. You can use a roller to roll it out, to give it a nice pressure. And this is very much a happy accident. You haven't got a clue what it's going to look like when you get there. Okay, so obviously your paper has to be wet enough as well. You know, it mustn't be too dry. Okay. Okay, and then we'll see what happens when we lift it. Oh! Oh, wow.
Wow. Oh.
I mean, you know what? You could actually have quite a lot of fun here. You could actually make another, you know, when this is dry, you could go and you could make another one with some colors. You could almost do like, oh, hey, I think it's a brilliant idea. I just thought, Beak, really, Beak? Like, I know you're happy, but seriously. Oh, my word, parrot. Okay. All right, so there you can see that actually looks very cool, and it's sort of different to the way the other one came out. But remember, I'm going to have to give it time for the salts to actually react as well. So we don't quite know how this is going to actually come out. If I wanted to, I could actually go and put more salt on top as well. So I could sprinkle some more salt on top, or I could even spray. Okay, so if I wanted to, say for instance, spray there, just to see what happens, and then let it, there we go. So that's giving me something completely different. Okay. Can you? Okay, so I'm going to leave this one flat. I'm going to leave this one to dry. And I'm going to do it with some watercolor and see what happens with that one. And the watercolor, you can just do watercolor. If you want to add some of the salt to it as well, you can afterwards. But then I wouldn't do it now. I would do it afterwards. Okay. So I'm going to do the same. This one I'm just going to wet normally. Again, I'm going to use the non-sticky side. And now I'm going to grab some watercolors. And like I said, you can actually have a lot of fun with this because you could literally have another piece of paper, put some inks on and maybe put it on top of that one, you know. Yeah, you can actually have quite a fair amount of creativity here. Cool, so I'm going to put some colours here. Oh. Let's make this nice and cheerful. So remember your watercolors aren't quite so intense in color. Okay, so obviously depending on how thick you put the watercolor down is going to affect, because your paper is also going to be wet, remember. Okay, so just remember, if your watercolor is not very intense on here, it's not going to be very intense on your paper either, because you're going to be adding water to it as well. So that will definitely determine how well it's going to work. Okay, so I'm going to wet this, but I'm not going to wet my paper too much because I don't want it to be too sopping wet. So if you don't have water on your paper, you're just going to get those sort of patterns on there, but it'll be much sharper. I'm going to rub quite hard. So it is nice to have a roller, because it really pushes the colour down, you know, and sort of spreads it out nicely. So yeah, if you have got a roller, it is obviously nice. But if you don't have one, it's also fine. Okay, then let's just see what happens. Oh, look at that. Oh, wow. All right, so and obviously you can do this with your inks as well. You can mix, you can have quink and ink and whatever. I mean, you can have a ball, you know, you can have different effects, etc. And then obviously on top of this, you can obviously add your salt as well if you want to, you know, and then have the salt effects as well. So maybe I'll just add some normal table salt to this and then just see what happens to that, what textures it gives it, you know, and let it do its thing. And I'll just let it dry. So before you start painting onto this, you must just try and make sure that you do get as much of the salt off as possible. Okay, so if you do use the hairdryer, it does unfortunately sometimes make the salt stick. Okay, so you're going to have to really give it a good rub to get that salt off. But just remember, obviously your paper has to be 100% dry. Okay, so you can actually see here what's nice. Can you see the difference between, this is the Glauber salt. Can you see how fine those crystals are? It gives an incredibly fine, I don't know if you guys can see okay there. Can you see right there? So you can see it gives a very, very fine finish. Okay, so if you're looking for something like that, that's very fine, then you can do that. This is the Epsom salt. And then this is the lots of salt with water mix. Okay, so I'm going to do my little drop on there. It's not too wet. Yeah, that one's too wet to work on, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to leave that. Actually, I'm going to use, look, the Epsom salt and the salt is very similar, so I'm just going to use the Epsom salt and just see if that one works. Okay. So what you're going to do here, you're going to take a smallish paintbrush and you're going to paint the shape of a drop. Now remember, drops aren't necessarily oval or round exactly. If you go and splash water onto some glass or something, you're going to see that the drops aren't necessarily absolutely round, but we, just for the sake of showing you how to do this, we're going to make a round drop. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to basically take water and you're going to make a round. I'm actually make this one bigger so that you can see better. I'm going to make this quite a large drop. Okay. All right, so there we've got a drop. Okay, now what you're going to do is, if you look at a drop, you're going to see it has got a shadow, okay, at the bottom, depending on obviously where your light is coming from, but for the sake of this, we're going to put a shadow at the bottom, and we're also going to put a bit of a shadow at the top. Then we're going to put a highlight in as well. Okay, and I'm going to, you obviously need to stick with the colors that it's lying on. So you can't now go and make this a green dot, I mean a green drop, obviously, because remember it's see-through, so it's obviously reflecting and showing through what is on the other side, what's underneath it. Okay, so you have to stick with those colors. You can't just randomly change your colors. All right, so I'm going to go with purpley color here, and we're going to make this quite dark here. I'm going to start off like that, then I'm going to wipe my thing clean, and then I'm going to drag it slightly down so that it's not a solid line. It mustn't be absolutely solid. Okay, there must be a solid edge around there like that, and that can go a little bit darker. You can add a little bit of water because we want to soften this. Okay, just have a little bit of paper on hand. Okay, I'm going to make it a little bit darker at the top, so my paint needs to be a little bit thicker. Okay, and then I'm going to make a shadow underneath, and that I'm going to make quite dark. And the shadow will follow the shape of what's underneath. So this shape over here, the shadow will be shaped the same way. It won't be a different shadow. And you're going to drag it slightly up around the edges over there, just slightly there, because your shadow won't just stop there. Very, very lightly. That's why you can see I need a small paintbrush for this. And we're going to do this on the big one, okay, guys? Okay, so a little bit more on the blue side, maybe. So I've gone a little bit too purple, but it's fine. I'm just going to add a bit of blue to that. As long as it's dark. And it has got some of those colours in there. Okay. And remember, it must follow the same shape as this at the bottom here. And that also, you can make it either a hard shadow or you can make it a soft shadow. Okay. Just going to try and get that to dry a little bit. Okay, so you can see it's already got that impression of a water drop sitting on top of your watercolor there. Right, so it could be a little bit darker at the top there. Okay, so now you have a choice here. You can either use, if you've got gouache, you can use gouache. You can also use white ink as well. Okay, so if you want to take a bit of white ink, you can put a little bit of a highlight with the white ink. But if you don't have either of those, you can actually just scratch it out. Okay, so I'm just wondering if it's dry enough, but we're going to give it a try. You can scratch it out with your knife, very carefully. All right, so just take your craft knife. Okay, so this does work quite well, but I prefer to use, just be very, very careful here. And you can actually scratch your highlight out. So your water drop will always have a highlight in the dark thing, just like your eye does, you know. Something's shining in your eye there. There we go. And then what you can do is you could even scratch out a little bit on the side as well. Because remember, your drop is round, so it'll have a highlight at the top, and it'll also have a highlight down the edges as well. But this does work a little bit better if you've got white, ink, or you've got gouache as well. Okay, so that's how you do your water drop. I'm going to quickly put the white ink on just to show you what it looks like with the white ink. And this is what you're going to be doing on your other piece of work. Once all of that watercolor is dry, properly dry, you've taken all the salt off, you're going to put a whole lot of water drops onto that paper. So it's extremely effective. So what you can do is you can use a very small paintbrush. You can test to make sure that you got the right amount of ink on there. So this is just a Eco line. It's like an acrylic ink. And you can use that to bring in a highlight instead. Can you see it's a bit more effective? And then I can put down the side here and down the side there. There we go. And there's your water drop. Okay, cool. Yeah, so this one's actually looking quite nice. It's not quite dry yet. I'm just going to quickly grab the hairdryer. Can you see how nice that's looking? It's actually looking very nice. So yeah, I'm going to quickly see if I can just get the hairdryer and just hair dry it a bit. Okay, cool. So I've just dried most of it with the hairdryer. I'm just going to take I'm going to take the salt off as much as I can. If you just take a brand new scourer, okay, and you just use that to take your salt off. That really works very, very well. It doesn't damage the paper, but obviously your paper must be completely dry. Okay, but that actually works extremely well, very nicely. Because your hand just doesn't do the job. Okay, and then this is the watercolor paper, so you can see it's obviously reacted slightly differently because it's got the sort of got the folds in it, not the folds, it's got the texture to it. So this is a textured watercolor paper, so it's a cold press. But I'm very happy with what I've got here, and I'm going to put some of those water drops on top of this afterwards now. So, okay, so just rub your hand over the top, try and get off as much of the salt as possible. My paper is very slightly damp still, but it's not anything to be worried about. It's not going to catch on here. You can see it's still buckling slightly. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, then we're going to have my small tiny little paintbrush that we use to paint the dots with, and the medium size one. So here you can decide how big you want to make your dots. Okay. Just remember you need to have the colors that you put down originally. So you need I've got my French ultramarine and my cerulean. So I'm going to be having I'll put those two down so that I have got them at least. Okay, so remember, like I said, you don't have to stick with the normal sort of teardrop shape if you don't want to. You can give your water droplets different shapes. You can even go look on the internet and actually look to see sort of what water drops look like, you know what I mean? So, but if you want to make it more of a sort of like illustrative value, if you want to put it that way, you can just stick with the standard sort of drop shapes, okay, and vary them slightly. So I'm going to grab a paintbrush. I don't want one that's too large. Okay, so I don't want too large a paintbrush. I find it's just easy, or it depends on how big you want your drops, obviously. Okay, so remember to use clean water to do the initial drop first, and to sort of stick to the darker areas. You can also do it on the slightly lighter areas. Just remember, then you need to try and make sure that it does sort of match when you're doing the rest of the picture. And remember, just take a little bit of paper just to get an idea of where you're going with your dots. So you can just dab with your paper there. And remember, make your water drops a different size each time as well. So don't make them the same size, okay? Beek, where are you off to? So remember, the bottom must follow the shape, the shadow at the bottom must follow the shape, okay, of the bottom of your water drop. Very important that. Okay, so there we go. I've done all the water droplets. I'm going to take the tape off as soon as the paper is 100% dry. And then I'll post everything at the end of the tutorial once I've taken the salt off all the other ones as well. I hope you enjoyed this. Until next time. Cheers.